And Mike is a busy guy, you know. He says, and coming to the I saw Mike's presentation at the Water Planning Council meeting, and I says, we got to have you on our committee. And he says, you know, he was there, and the guy has been an advocate, and we certainly do appreciate his efforts. And without any further ado, Mr. Mike Emmons.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks everybody for having me. As Dave said, in the little state of Connecticut, tucked in the eastern hills, sits the largest container nursery on the East Coast north of Florida. Small nursery, a small state, large nursery. It wasn't always that way. But as the also being on the Water Planning Council advisory group, I also represent the interests of the CNLA, or the Connecticut Nursery Landscapes Association. And as you can see, the state trade organization, it grosses more than $800 million a year for the state. The industry employs approximately 30,000 people. And the CNLA, Connecticut Nursery Landscape Association, has over 500 members. Back in the early to mid-60s into the early 70s, there was a transformation in the nursery industry from field-grown operations to container operations. That allowed growers like myself to grow large numbers of plants on a small area profitably and quickly, and turn over the material very fast. But there was a trade-off, and the trade-off is we consume a tremendous amount of water. And that water cannot be taken lightly. Our whole livelihood at Pride's Corner Farms and all container nurseries is water. Without water, we have no business. So I missed a slide, but at Pride's Corner Farms, we consume about between 200 and 300 million gallons of water a year. And that's based on approximation that an acre of container stock will require about 27,000 gallons of water. Now, 27,000 gallons of water represents an acre inch. So what we're saying is that when we have a watering event, we're going to approximately water those plants up to an inch. And what I wanted to get at was we have the capacity to hold about 178 million gallons of water in our nursery, but statistically, we use much more than that, almost 300 million gallons of water. And as you can see, we don't have the capacity to control our destiny if there was no rain. So how do we get that extra water? The first thing is that Mother Nature has to help. On average, the state of Connecticut gets about 45 inches a year. As a container nursery grower, we all know that that varies tremendously from year to year. This year, so far in the last year, was a very wet summer, but between 2012 and 2016, we had a progressively drier and drier summer. So you got to figure out where that water is going to come from, or how do you mitigate the effects of a drought so you can extend your water supply. Just the fact when our plants are spaced out, only about maybe half of the water actually gets to the plant. The rest runs off. Approximately 15 to 20% of it is absorbed into the ground, and about 10 to 15% of it evaporates. The rest runs back into our ponds. So we recycle 100% of the water that comes off our nursery, and we need to capture, recycle, and reuse this product. That's how we can extend our water supply as well. This quickly is a graph from 1960 to 2017 that shows you the variable recycles of precipitation in the state of Connecticut. And the bars represent the low points and the high points. And in a container nursery, those low points represent a real challenge for the nursery. And a lot of it depends on when the water falls. As you can see, between 2012 and 2017, we had a progressively drier and drier summer, and it really impacted the nursery industry in the state of Connecticut and in the East. To put that in perspective, between 1960 and 1967 or 68 was considered probably the driest summer period ever in the Northeast. When you read articles about the great droughts of America, the drought of the Northeast drought of the early 60s is in the top 5. And that to me was dramatic. The point I'm trying to make is that we're going to have periods of drought. And yes, we've had plenty of water, but there are going to be periods of drought. And this graph shows you that from time to time, there is extensive periods where Connecticut receives far less than the average. So as a nursery manager, I got tired of reacting to the droughts after it's occurred. You know, you look at your ponds and you determine that, hey, we've got to do something here, we're going to run out of water. So we had to come up with these protocols so that we're anticipating the drought long before it occurs. It's important that we react before we're in a drought. And nursery growers, and golf course managers, and anybody who has interest in agriculture needs to be good weathermen too. And they need to know what the long-range forecast is. So we came up with these levels that determine what we're going to do if we go into a drought. And just real quick, level 1 is basically there's no drought, but we still want our growers to be very conscious of the water system and make sure that it's running efficiently and holes are plugged and heads are turning properly. Level 2 is when you go with is what I call a voluntary drought restrictions. And basically, I'm asking the growers to voluntarily reduce their water needs by 25 to 30%. This basically primes the pump. And we basically go into the situation when I look at the long-term forecast and I look at our pond levels, our water supply, and I have to make a decision that we need to start with the water restriction process now. You don't want to do that when you're already in the middle of the drought. So this kind of gets the growers ready for the other water levels. Oops, going to go back. Level 3, and we go into this quite a bit, is it's a mandatory 25 to 30% reduction in our water supply, water consumption. And basically, we're telling our growers that if they're watering a plant for an hour, they need to reduce their water usage by about 20 minutes. That's a lot. And as you can see, level 4 is even more dramatic. And in 2015, and to a larger extent, 2016, when we had a very dry summer, we went to level 4, mandatory level 4 water restrictions in the nursery. And that's a lot. When you're asking your growers to reduce water consumption by 50%, sometimes they look at you and they said, are you sure you want to do this? But yes, sometimes you got to make hard decisions and you go to this level. We've never been in level 4, but I would tell you in level 5, but I will tell you in 2016 we were a week away from going to level 5. And level 5 would have been just, I'm not quite sure how we'd react to it because we've never been there. But these conservation levels has helped us navigate our nursery through the dry times as well, and helped us to extend our water supply. So how do you reduce water supply and still maintain quality plants and give them what they need? The most important thing we do is we pulse water. Pulse watering is when, instead of giving a plant one major water event, we'll give them multiple water events. And the idea is if you think about a sponge and it's bone dry, and you start pouring water all over it all at once. If that sponge is bone dry, the initial water is going to roll off of that continuously until the sponge slowly starts to absorb the water, and then it starts absorbing it more efficiently. What we're telling our growers to do, instead of one water event for 1 hour, we start with 2 water events for 20 minutes. And we found that by pulse water, we can reduce our water consumption by up to 30%. So that in itself is a big water savings. The first water event gets the soil primed for the second water event, which gets them nice and wet. And the byproduct of this too is the plant stays wetter over a long period of time. Rather than watering a plant early in the morning, you're watering it twice during the day, a couple hours in difference, it makes a big difference. The other thing we do is we water early in the day. In the morning, even before the sun comes up, there's less transpiration of the water. We get more of a runoff back. The plants are under less stress and they take up water more efficiently. We recapture our water, and watering early, it gets back into the ponds. These are the factors that we have to take in to determine how and when, how long we water the plants. For the sake of time, I'm going to overlook this, and I'm going to go right to one that we have all the stars in, because I have 11 growers, and 11 growers have 11 different ideas of what a plant's water needs are. If you take our look of our 11 growers, they may have 11 different interpretations of the moisture level of the container that we're trying to keep wet. So Ball Horticulture came up with these levels to determine how wet a soil is, without using sensors and everything. And the first one is level 5. It's basically saturation. You hold the soil in your hand, and the water runs right off without any compression. Level 4 is when you just compress it lightly and the water runs off freely. Level 3 is where we like to maintain our plant material, where you squeeze the water really hard and the water comes out of it. And level 2 is usually when you want to be watering. It's important not to let it get too much into level 2, because a plant that's dry requires more water to get it back up to its certain level. And depending on the time of the year, if your plant is at level 3 on a July morning, you know that plant's going to go to level 2, so you're going to want to water it to level 4, because like I said, watering the pots when the moisture level is high allows you to water less to get it up to the level you're trying to achieve. Now I want to talk a little bit about the physical investments that we've done to improve efficiency in the nursery, in our container nursery. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the conversion of the traditional impact head to what's called a rotating head. As you can see, the one on the left is from Netafim. It's a piston-driven head. It produces about 2.5 gallons of water per minute at 35 pounds per square inch. And the traditional impact head, the Rainbird on the right, produces 3.8 gallons of water in the same amount of time at 40 pounds of pressure. So the difference is that the one on the left requires less water. It puts out less water in the same amount of time. So you say, well, why would you want to convert to that? And I have a video that describes just the difference between these two and why we're converting to the Netafim head on the left. So in 2016, we bought a number of these heads, the Netafim heads on the left and the traditional impact heads on the right. And this was a windy September day in 2016. And the biggest thing you're going to notice is that 40 pounds per square inch, the impact head produces a lot of fine water droplets. Those water droplets become atomized, and up to 25% of the water actually floats away and is lost and evaporated. So 25% of the water we're trying to put on the plants never get to the plants. On the other side, the Netafim head puts out larger droplets, and therefore most of the water gets to the plant. So what we found that even at less gallons per minute, we can water these plants for the same amount of time as the Netafim heads and consume less water and get good, if not better, results. We've made a major investment to convert all of our nursery to these from the impact heads to the Netafim heads. And the savings to the nursery into our water supply should be in the millions of gallons a year. Now, 2016 was a very dry year, and since then it's been a little wet. So we haven't had a chance to really see how these are going to perform in a dry summer. But we've already seen the results, and we're confident that the nursery will save millions of gallons of water simply by converting from one head to the other. Again, there's the Maxi Bird. It puts out 3.3 gallons per 40 pounds per square. I went through all of this, so I won't repeat it. But the bottom line is that we've converted from an old technology to a newer technology simply by changing the heads, and we're going to save a lot of water. The last thing we want to talk about is drip irrigation. And drip irrigation is the most efficient way in the nursery industry to use water. It's 90% more efficient than overhead irrigation, and we've converted all of our larger containers, 7 gallon and up, which is about 100,000 containers, to drip irrigation. There's many different types of drip irrigation. This is called an inline emitter, where the water comes out of a very specific pot in the line. And this is a emitter that has what's called a spaghetti tube on the end of it. You can direct the water to where you want. This is a picture of a hydroponic tomato greenhouse where you have individual emitters on each individual plant. And finally, there's the soaker hose, which gardeners use, and which we use in our landscapes around the nursery. It puts water right where you want it without very little waste. These are the two types of sprinkler heads we use. The one on the left is called an Antel Schwubbler. It puts out 10 gallons per hour at 20 gallons per square inch, or 20 psi. And the one on the right is a spray stake. It puts out 5 gallons an hour at 20 pounds per square inch. We use both of them. The one on the left, the black one, the Antelco, I like a lot because you can clean it. The one on the left puts out a nice spray, but it's such a fine spray that if it's very easily get clogged and you can't clean it very well. The one on the left puts out like an umbrella. With the Antelco, the black one puts out an umbrella-like water pattern, and if you sell that plant or move it, it's not there, you can turn that off. Because we are in eastern Connecticut, and wells are not are something that's just not a viable alternative, all of our water is pond water. We storage water, and it's very dirty water. And if you're going to use a drip irrigation system, it has to be very, very clean. This is a Netafin 8-disc filter. It filters out the water that we use on our irrigation system, and it also backwashes the water when the difference between the intake and the outflow becomes 10 pounds per square inch. So it can automatically bat feed. You have to have a good back flush flow, or else these heads get clogged up very quickly. And there's one of Tom's Hunter timers. We like Hunter because it's very versatile. We need versatility when we use drip irrigation. We like to water at night. We like to have multiple water events. We have 24 zones in one area, and each zone requires a different type of water pattern or a water time. And this timer allows us to be very, very flexible. The last thing we do in the nursery, and this is something that we've done more recently, is in the greenhouse industry, wetting agents were used for a long time for bedding plants. It's a way to get the soil wet faster without having to use a lot of water. The reason why it hadn't been used in the nursery industry is because our crops are longer term. It's been very difficult to find materials that would give us longevity so that we can use it. And more recently, we found these products that will give us up to a year's of longevity in the containers. The products with a single asterisk are called, they're wetting agents. Basically, they break down the surface tension in the soil, allows the water to be absorbed very quickly into the soil. When you have dry soil, these wetting agents allow the soil to be absorbed very, very quickly instead of running through it. The one with the double asterisk is stock absorbed. It's a gel. It's a hydrogel, and what that does is it takes excess water and it stores it. And as the soil around it dries out through osmosis, this water is released. These are all very effective and gives us long-term. We're using this almost entirely in the nursery now, where 3 years ago we weren't using any wetting agents. Today we're using wetting agents in all our soil. It's very important. It allows us to water more efficiently and water less and still get good results. So real quick in conclusion, there are practical things we do in the nursery. We're not a nursery with a lot of high-tech equipment, although we're trying to convert to more high-tech where water sensors can be used. We're looking at that for our drip irrigation, where sensors determine when we can actually water rather than a human being. And it's important to use the products up to our specifications. I mentioned that the irrigation heads have there's a range where they're most efficient, and the range is in pounds per square inch. Every nurseryman will tell you, and even in the residential area, that the most inefficient use of water is when we water at too high a water pressure. We need to regulate that water pressure so the products we're using are used at the most efficient range. Always keeping up on new technology is important. And finally, droughts will happen. And that's the thing we need to be aware of. We have to be ready for it. So that's all I have. Thank you.